Hello everybody, welcome to this short video tutorial about Freud's use of the case study. Today I'm going to be talking to you about what a case study is. We're going to be looking at why Freud used the case study method. We're going to be using examples from case studies to demonstrate Freudian concepts, and finally we'll be evaluating the use of the case study. So before we go any further then, just a brief reminder of what a case study actually is. It's an in-depth, detailed analysis of one person or a small group of people which gathers vast amounts of quantitative data. Case studies are useful for exploring the reasons behind behaviour and provide a more thorough understanding than the snapshot of laboratory research. When we carry out laboratory research, we can only really understand behaviour as it occurs under those conditions at that time, and we can't find out about any real meanings behind behaviour. Laboratory research isn't designed to do that anyway. This is where the case study really comes into its own to give us that more thorough understanding. So moving on then and having a look at Freud's use of the case study. Freud studied his patients. He was working with patients who had various behavioural abnormalities. So behavioural abnormalities ranging from phobias, depression, hysteria, OCD, suicidal tendencies, and he was attempting to find the root cause of their behavioural abnormalities. And he argued that the causes of behavioural abnormality are unconscious and usually linked to repressed impulses and traumatic experiences, etc. He was particularly interested in how early childhood experiences, particularly sexual experience, influence our adult behaviour and perhaps any adult behavioural abnormalities. And he used a range of techniques as part of the case study method to unlock the unconscious mind. He used things like dream analysis, hypnosis, and free association. And these were all techniques to open up the unconscious mind to treat the root cause of any behavioural abnormality. Now, we have studied these techniques in AS psychology, so we don't really need to talk about them any further, and we can move on and start to have a look at one of Freud's most famous case studies, the Little Hans case study, and this can be used to demonstrate and provide evidence for a lot of the concepts in his theories. So let's have a brief recap then of the features of the Little Hans case study. If you remember, a 5-year-old boy had a phobia of horses. He was particularly afraid that a horse would bite him as a punishment for Hans wanting the horse to be dead. At the same time as the phobia began, Hans' father noticed that Hans had become increasingly clingy with his mother. So there's some key features. Obviously there is more detail to the Hans case study, but you have studied it in AS, in phobias, gender development and key approaches. So we're just going to focus on these key features for now. Freud used these features of Hans' phobia to provide evidence for the Oedipus complex and also to provide evidence for his ideas on repression and displacement. So what Freud argued was that the horse was a symbol of Hans' father, the horse being very, very powerful, symbolic of the father's power, and the Hans' fear of wanting the horse to be dead, or Hans' idea of wanting the horse to be dead, represented Hans going through the Oedipus complex, i.e. wanting the father out of the way so that he could have his mother all to himself. And this is further demonstrated by Hans' behaviour towards his mother at around about the age of 5, when he would be in the phallic stage of development. Now, in terms of defence mechanisms, the fear of the horse, Freud argued, was actually symbolic of fear of the father, which had been repressed and then displaced onto the horse, and the fear that the horse would bite him. Freud argued that this represented Hans' castration anxiety, which was part of the Oedipus complex. So we have a lot going on in that case study, and it's a good one to demonstrate key features in Freudian theory, such as the Oedipus complex and the role of defence mechanisms in phobias with the displacement of the fear of the father onto the fear of the horse. So moving on then to criticisms of the use of the case study method. Well, the first problem is that the use of qualitative data is subjective. Because the data is qualitative, i.e. words, verbal data, this is very much open to interpretation. So we see here very, very clearly that we're going to have replication issues because one researcher could interpret the same material in a very, very different way to another researcher. And again, similar replication issues. We've got the interpretation of dreams and symbols and so on is highly subjective. Again, another researcher could interpret the same patterns and symbols that we see in dreams and free association and so on in a very, very different way. So again, we have replication issues. We have the use of unique, unusual cases. So Little Hans is just one example of a case study that was carried out by Freud. There are many other case studies. What they all had in common was that there were very, very unusual, unique cases. And so Freud can be criticised here for generalising findings from such an unrepresentative sample. And then finally, Freud is criticised of subjectivity again in that he fit details of cases around his pre-existing ideas. So all of these problems that we see with the case study method is what makes them incredibly unscientific, and Freud has received enormous criticism for this. So that's the end of that brief tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. As ever, if you have any questions, you can tweet me at Walking Psych. And if you'd like to take your knowledge further about Freud's use of the case study, I have put some documents onto Moodle, some extension reading documents, where you can have a look at some more of Freud's case studies. And I'm also going to put a video link on to a documentary which details one of Freud's most famous cases, which was the case of Dora. So I hope you've learnt something here. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you all soon.